The morning sun was gentle, but inside the hospital, Kenny's world was anything but bright. His 6-year-old son, Caleb, lay weak on a thin white bed, his little hands lost among wires and tubes. The doctors had said it again that morning. Without surgery, the boy wouldn't survive. Kenny stood quietly by the window, staring at the city beyond the glass. He was a welder, a single dad, and a man running out of miracles. Ever since his wife died, giving birth to Caleb, every spark from his welding torch, every drop of sweat, every sleepless night had been for his son. But now, even that wasn't enough. That he stepped out of the hospital, trying to find air that didn't taste like hopelessness. His worn-out shoes splashed through puddles as the city woke around him. Vendors shouted, buses roared, and people rushed by, none of them knowing that for one father, the world was ending quietly. Then he saw it. Across the street, pinned to an old notice board, was a crisp white poster. It looked out of place among all the torn ads and flyers. Urgently seeking marriage contract candidate, immediate compensation. The Reed Foundation. And in smaller print, applicants must be honest, responsible, and discreet. Medical sponsorship available for families in need. Kenny's heart stopped. Medical sponsorship. He read the words again, his hands trembling. The Reed family. He had heard the name before. Billionaires. One of the most powerful families in the city. He thought it was probably some joke or publicity stunt. But when he looked back at the hospital behind him, at the window of Caleb's room glowing faintly under the sun, he realized he didn't have the luxury to doubt. Before we go deeper into this story, if you believe in kindness, miracles, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep spreading hope through stories that touch the heart. BY afternoon. Kenny stood outside the Reed estate, an enormous mansion surrounded by iron gates and trimmed gardens. He had never seen anything like it. Inside, everything gleamed. White marble, golden chandeliers, walls lined with paintings that looked older than his entire neighborhood. But a man in a black suit led him into a large office where an older lawyer sat waiting. The man spoke calmly, professionally, as if describing a business deal. Charlotte Reed, the only daughter of the Reed family, had suffered a tragic car accident that killed her fiancé and left her paralyzed from the waist down. Since that night, she hadn't spoken a single word. The tragedy had drawn endless media attention, and the family's reputation was beginning to crack under pressure. They wanted to protect their name and their business. For that, they needed a story, a husband who would stay by Charlotte's side, keep the press quiet, and make her life appear normal. The lawyer slid a paper across the table. In return, he said, the family will cover all your son's medical expenses and pay you a substantial amount when the year ends. Kenny's throat went dry. It sounded insane. Wrong. But when the image of Caleb flashed in his mind, his son fighting for every breath, his decision became painfully clear. That he signed the contract. That evening, he became the husband of a woman who couldn't even look at him. Charlotte Reed's room was bright and silent. She sat in her wheelchair, her blonde hair shining under the morning light, her face beautiful but expressionless. Her eyes were fixed on the garden outside, watching nothing. When Kenny entered, she didn't turn her head. The nurse whispered politely, "Mrs. Reed, this is your husband." But there was no reaction. Not a word. Not a blink. Kenny felt like a shadow in a house of ghosts. Days passed. He played the role, sitting beside her during family dinners, posing for photographs that would later appear in glossy magazines under headlines like "Tragic Heiress Finds Love Again." But behind the pictures was silence. Always silence. At night, Kenny would visit Caleb in the hospital, read him stories, and hold his little hand until he fell asleep. Then he'd come back to the mansion, where even the air felt lonely. Still, something about Charlotte drew him in. She looked fragile, but behind her eyes, he saw pain so deep it almost spoke louder than words. One afternoon, while cleaning the corner of her room, he found a framed picture half hidden under her books, a young man smiling beside her, the same man she lost in the accident. That night, Kenny sat near her window and said softly, "He must have loved you a lot." She didn't reply, but a single tear slipped down her cheek. From that day, Kenny couldn't stop caring. That he started spending more time in her room. He talked to her about small things, about the rain, about Caleb's bravery, about the way the welding sparks looked like fireflies. He brought flowers, played soft music, and read poetry to her even though she never answered. He didn't realize it, but slowly, his words were reaching her. Then came the day that changed everything. Kenny brought Caleb to the mansion. The doctors had said he could leave the hospital for a few hours. The little boy walked slowly, still weak, but smiling. He looked at Charlotte, who sat silently by the window, and walked right up to her. "Hi," he said cheerfully. "I'm Caleb. My dad says you're really brave." Charlotte's eyes moved toward him for the first time. Caleb placed his tiny hand on hers and whispered, "Don't be sad, Miss Charlotte. Daddy says people who forget how to move just need love to help them remember." And then it happened. Charlotte blinked. A tear rolled down her face. Her lips trembled. Kenny froze. For the first time in over a year, Charlotte made a sound, a faint, broken whisper. That night, Kenny couldn't sleep. Something inside him had changed. He began to believe that maybe love wasn't gone from her. It was just buried deep, waiting for someone small and innocent like Caleb to bring it back. Days passed, and Charlotte began to move a little more, her fingers twitching, her head turning toward voices. The doctors called it a miracle, a psychological awakening. But to Kenny, it was hope taking its first breath. That he sat by her every day, talking gently, holding her hand, teaching her how to move again, slowly, patiently. Sometimes she tried to speak, but the words came out broken. Still, he encouraged her, whispering, "You can do this. I'm here." Then one night, when the sky outside was heavy with rain, everything changed again. Kenny was returning from the hospital after Caleb's surgery, a surgery the Reed Foundation had paid for, and it had gone well. When he entered Charlotte's room, she was awake, staring at him with trembling eyes, her lips parted, and a voice, fragile like wind, escaped. "You believed first." Kenny froze. She was speaking, really speaking. Tears filled his eyes as he knelt beside her, taking her hands. "Charlotte," he whispered, his voice breaking, "you're back." She looked at him, her eyes shining with life for the first time. "I don't want to be alone anymore," she whispered. Kenny couldn't stop himself. He leaned closer and kissed her, softly, lovingly, like a man afraid that love might vanish again. And then, something unbelievable happened as Charlotte's legs trembled. Her fingers tightened around his hands. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself upward, first an inch, then more, until she was standing. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't stop. She stood. For the first time in years, Charlotte Reed stood on her own feet, held not by strength, but by love. The doctors called it a medical mystery. The Reeds called it a miracle. But Kenny knew it was neither. It was love. Weeks later, Charlotte could walk with support. She began speaking freely, laughing with Caleb, playing piano again. The cold marble mansion that once echoed with silence was now filled with music, laughter, and warmth. One evening, as the three of them watched the sunset from the balcony, Charlotte looked at Kenny and said softly, "Do you still think love can fix everything?" Kenny smiled, pulling her and Caleb close. "No," he said gently, "but love makes everything worth fixing."